Thank you. Order, please. We'll begin the daily routine. Presenting and reading petitions. Presenting reports of committees. Petition. Presenting and reading petitions, the Honourable Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I beg leave to introduce a petition containing 1,500 names, and it reads as follows. Concerning the Northwood Extended Care Facility for the Cobequid Health Area, we, the undersigned, are very concerned by the rumors circulating that the Northwood have decided to locate the facility in Hammonds Plains. We believe the Rocky Lake Commons to be a superior location, more central, nearer to the Cobequid Health Centre, adjacent to shopping, with many youth facilities, which the elderly will enjoy, the young people. Excellent transportation with the Burnside Expressway soon to be built, plus the land is available for immediate development. Mr. Speaker, I have affixed my signature and wish to submit this petition.
The petition is tabled. Presenting reports of committees. Another petition. Presenting and reading petitions, the Honourable Member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to table a petition, whereas I affix my signature. The petition reading, Route 210 west from Greenfield to Route 8 is in bad shape and needs upgrading. This is an important connector route for business, commuters to Liverpool, residents traveling to medical appointments, and for the Greenfield Fire Department to respond to fire and medical emergencies.
The petition is tabled. No other petitions. Tabling reports or presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise in the legislature today to announce the signing of Nova Scotia's national response in the event of a foreign animal disease outbreak such as the avian influenza. We are extremely pleased to have developed this plan with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. The Foreign Animal Disease Emergency Support Plan, or FAIDS, as we refer to it, looks at the prevention, early detection, and quick response to any foreign animal disease outbreak that may develop in the province. This is key to ensuring the sustainability of our agriculture sector. Mr. Speaker, we have been working on developing this plan following the outbreak of the avian influenza in British Columbia in 2004. This FAIDS plan was developed through consultation with the two levels of government and stakeholders. Having an effective emergency plan in place prior to any outbreak is critical to its control and eradication. By understanding the process and steps to follow in the event of a foreign animal disease outbreak, we can respond quickly to the situation. Many of our agriculture producers in Nova Scotia have been working on their own emergency plan, which will link to our plan. Even with a quick and effective response to any outbreak, we know it could cause major social and economic losses. So depending on the issue, our response plan calls for such actions as quarantine, eradication practices, surveillance testing, and repopulation. We will regularly review and update the plan, as well as carry out exercises that will ensure that the contents remain pertinent and up to date. It's important that government and industry communicate on a regular basis and are ready to implement an emergency plan if needed. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and industry for working with us on the national FAIDS plan. I want to also commend industry on their efforts to develop specific response plans for their sector. It has been a joint effort on the part of many people, and I also want to commend the Minister of Fisheries for his support to this initiative, and I want to thank you, Mr. Speaker, and all members of the House. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Pictou East.
Mr. Speaker, in the absence of the agriculture critic, it is my pleasure to respond to this issue. And I would like to say that we are glad to see that the province is preparing for such an event as the avian flu, a possible outbreak. We certainly hope and pray that we will not be encountering such a situation as British Columbia did. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to commend the minister, the present minister, and the former minister. It's nice to be able to have something to commend this government on. And I think that this is very appropriate to say a job well done. Any outbreak will lead to economic hardship and severe losses to our economy. And for preparing for those situations, we can only hope that impacts will be lessened if, in fact, an outbreak does happen here. This is something our agriculture critic hopes to get more details on from the minister in the near future. But in concluding, Mr. Speaker, I do want to say, job well done to the minister.
The honourable member. The honourable member for Annapolis.
Response from his reply or the fact that I was standing up? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the minister for the advanced copy of his statement. We, as well as the caucus, are extremely pleased to see this plan unfolded because, quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, about a year ago when I suggested this province wasn't ready, I was accused of fear-mongering. I'm pleased today that the minister has acknowledged that we weren't. We've all gone through what has happened in the agricultural industry when a disease hits our country and we're not prepared for it in the mad cow situation. Even though it didn't arrive in our province, it affected the industry and it affected the confidence of Canadians in the food security and whether or not the products they were buying would be safe. So I am pleased to see that the province has worked with the federal government and its other counterparts to ensure that this plan is here. Part of this plan, Mr. Speaker, looks at three phases: prevention, early detection, and a quick response. And it's important. It's important for us as a province to be prepared if and when, quite frankly, it happens here in this province. But more importantly, I'm pleased to see that this plan is dealing with the prevention side. Many of our agricultural community members have been way ahead of us. If any of you have been on a poultry farm in this province, you know they've been dealing with this issue for the last number of years, and it's time that we as elected officials have caught up and have begun to recognize the seriousness of the fact that this is going to happen. Another part, Mr. Speaker, that I think the minister should be commended on, but also I would encourage the minister to take special note of the part of the review process. The industry is changing, and the industry changes on a regular basis, Mr. Speaker, and it's important. It's important, whatever plan is in place, that it's able to respond to the industry at that specific time. So I want to say to the minister that I would encourage his department to keep a special watch on this because it is critical that we are able to respond to the needs of the industry as it begins to unfold. In closing, I just want to say to the minister how important, and he knows this coming from his industry, how important agriculture is to our rural economy, and quite frankly to the economy of Nova Scotia. Our rural economy has been suffering ever since the BSE crisis hit in Western Canada, and it has affected the economy of Nova Scotia and the rural economy. You can only begin to imagine what would happen if the avian flu hit this province and what would happen to our rural economy. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to say to the minister, this is a great first step. I want you to make sure that this plan is continually updated so that we can ensure Nova Scotians not only that we're prepared to protect the rural economy, the jobs that are associated with that, but we are prepared to be able to tell them that the food industry in Canada and in this province is secure, it's safe, and it's the best in the world, and that we are leading the world in that. So, Mr. Speaker, with that, I will sit down.
Well, this chamber is familiar with many types of outbreaks of which there's not prevention plans for. However, government notices of motion. The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas over the years, Tim Hortons has grown to become an unofficial Canadian symbol, with a franchise now opening up a home in Afghanistan, appropriately opening on Canada Day to the open arms of deserving troops serving in Kandahar. And whereas two staffers from Lower Sackville, Kathy Oak and Terry Lemoyne, are part of the Tim Hortons crew that are serving up double-doubles and Boston creams to lineups on a daily basis. And whereas Ms. Lemoyne was quoted in the Daily News today, "It makes you feel really good," end quote, to give Canadian soldiers a little piece of home. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House salute our soldiers and their new supportive crew, including our own Nova Scotian contingent of Mrs. Oak and Mr. Lemoyne, who are also braving the heat and dangerous conditions through their work at Tim Hortons at Kandahar for serving up a little reminder of life in Canada, one cup at a time. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the saying, "It couldn't happen to a nicer guy," was never more true when Ian Thompson hit a hole-in-one at the 22nd annual Down East Communications Danny Gallivan Cystic Fibrosis Golf Tournament. And whereas Mr. Thompson, our province's senior representative in Ottawa, was the founder 22 years ago of the tournament to help raise funds to find a cure for the devastating disease which so tragically ended the lives of his beloved and talented children, Jane and Rob. And whereas this is just what this annual tournament did, raising almost $800,000 over the more than 2 decades it has been held. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Ian Thompson on what he calls a lucky shot, which did net him a nice prize, but more importantly signaled another successful tournament and raised further needed support to help find a cure for those living with CF. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Howard Windsor, having served in excess of 28 years as a member of the public service of the province of Nova Scotia, will be retiring at the end of this week. And whereas Howard Windsor has served the province in many capacities over those 28 years, most recently as Deputy Minister to the Premier, Deputy Minister of Treasury and Policy Board, and Deputy Minister of Communications, Nova Scotia. And whereas Howard Windsor has provided tremendous service, support, and leadership to the public service of Nova Scotia, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House express their thanks and appreciation for his dedicated service to the province for over 28 years, and wish Howard Windsor and his family our sincere best wishes for a happy and fulfilling retirement. Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. Introduction of bills. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 120 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Daycare Act.
Good for you. Good for you. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 120 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Daycare Act.
Bill 53, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 120 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Daycare Act.
Ordered that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 27 of the Acts of 1998, the Wilderness Areas Protection Act. Thank you. Thank you.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 27 of the Acts of 1998, the Wilderness Areas Protection Act.
Bill 54, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 27 of the Acts of 1998, the Wilderness Areas Protection Act.
Ordered that this bill be read a second time on a future day. The honourable member for Kings West.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to enter an act to amend Chapter 371 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Public Highways Act.
The honourable member for Kings West begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 371 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Public Highways Act.
Bill 55, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 371 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Public Highways Act.
Ordered this bill be read a second time on a future day. Notices of motion. The honourable member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the many dedicated volunteers throughout our communities make good things happen, and whereas Mr. Chris Stoddard of Hants East Rural High has been active in holding positions on various student bodies. And whereas on April 28, 2006, Mr. Stoddard was recognized by the municipality of East Hants with a Shining Star Award for his outstanding contribution to the school and to his community. Therefore, be resolved, this House of Assembly congratulate Chris Stoddard on receiving the Shining Star Award and wish him much success in further volunteer endeavors. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and pass these out to debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Myra Gala concluded the week-long celebrations on July the 8th, 2006 in Marion Bridge, and whereas this celebration has been ongoing for 30 years, welcoming former residents and tourists to enjoy a parade, concerts, dances, and barbecues to celebrate life along the Myra River, and whereas the Myra River is the longest river system in Nova Scotia and has been made famous by Alistair McGilvery's song, Out on the Myra, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate the organizing committee for their volunteer efforts to stage this important country-flavored festival and extend its best wishes as plans begin for next year's Myra Gala. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas I recently had the pleasure to attend the groundbreaking ceremony for Eric Graves Memorial Junior High School outdoor classroom, and whereas this event included the removal of asphalt and digging holes for the placement of trees, and whereas due to the volunteer efforts of community members, staff, students, and the Evergreen Foundation, students have access to a lovely outdoor classroom complete with sitting stones. Therefore, be it resolved that this Legislative Assembly congratulate those involved in the outdoor classroom project at Eric Graves Memorial Junior High School and thank them for all they have done for our students and our community, and I request waiver and passage of notice without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on June 24, 2006, the St. Thomas United Baptist Church of North Preston held their annual graduates banquet, recognizing all the members of their community who graduated this year from high school, university, college, and for the first time in the community, a graduate from the RCMP Police Academy. And whereas this year they had more graduates than any previous year for a total of 103. Whereas these graduates bring pride to their community and set a standard for all other youth that are coming behind them. Therefore, be resolved that all members of the House congratulate all the graduates from the North Preston community and wish them success with their future endeavors. And Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for waiver of notice, and passage without debate.
Agreed? All those in favor, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. And I would like to point out, Mr. Speaker, that the individual that I'm referencing in this resolution is the first cousin of the honourable member for Cumberland North. Whereas Muriel Fage is headed to the Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Fame this October in the Builders category, and whereas Muriel has been involved with curling since 1977 at the local, provincial, national, international level, serving as president of the Nova Scotia Ladies Curling Association and sitting on the board of directors of the Canadian Curling Association, and whereas Muriel has chaired the Scott Tournament of Hearts, the MT&T Curling Classic Bondsville, and in 2003 elected to the board of directors of the Sandra Foundation and organizes the National Telethon. Therefore be it resolved that all members of the House join me in sending our hearty congratulations to Muriel Fage for induction into the Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Fame. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Bill Bailey was a regimental sergeant major with the North Nova Scotia Highlanders from 1939 to 1945, who helped liberate Othi, located in Normandy, France. And whereas Mr. Bailey often returned to Othi, first as part of a documentary for the CBC, and for more than 25 years fundraising for the children of the community, establishing the Children of Othi Fund to raise money for their school until his death in 2002. And whereas in 2003, the Othi School was named the Bill Bailey School in his honor, and in June of this year, many of his family members once again traveled to Othi to donate his war medals and hat to this school. Therefore, it be resolved that this Nova Scotia Legislature congratulate all the Bailey family members for this fine and fitting memorial to a true hero, Sergeant Major Bill Bailey, North Nova Scotia Highlanders. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Helen Healy is leaving Park West School after serving as vice principal and principal since its opening in September 2000, and whereas Helen has successfully managed the challenges of this school that serves the fast-growing and diverse community of Clayton Park West, and whereas Helen worked tirelessly to include parents in all aspects of their children's education by nurturing a strong PTA and holding special events such as literary cafes. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House thank Helen Healy for her leadership and service while at Park West School and wish her the best of luck as principal at Hammonds Plains Elementary in September. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas it was with great sadness in the midst of the general election we learned of the loss of a friend to many in this House, Mr. Dale Robbins. And whereas before his retirement only a few years ago, Dale has served as Director of Administration in the Office of the Speaker, and whereas he served with great honor throughout his years with government, assisting each MLA and their caucus offices with unending patience, efficiency, and kindness for the last 10 years of his government employment. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House salute Dale's life, his incredible work ethic, a life ended only after an incredible battle with cancer, and send condolences to his beloved wife, children, and family. And, Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Kyle Shubley was chosen as the Male Athlete of the Year at Brookside Junior High School, and whereas through his hard work and dedication, Kyle achieved this honor, whereas Kyle Shubley's commitment to his schoolwork and sports is exemplary,
Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulate Kyle Schrubley on his selection as Brookside Junior High School's Male Athlete of the Year. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Mr. Melvin McLean, the president of the Hub Amateur Athletic Club, and Ms. Lee McNeil, a member of the Hub Club's fundraising committee. Whereas Ms. Lee McNeil had organized the 22nd annual Christmas Daddies Mixed Slow Pitch Tournament, which was held at the Hub Amateur Athletic Club in Glace Bay. And whereas this is the 22nd year for the Amateur Athletic Club hosting this event to raise funding for Christmas Daddies, 14 teams participated this year, raising over $1,500. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of the House of Assembly congratulate both Mr. Melvin McLean and Ms. Lee McNeil for their dedication and hosting and fundraising of this event. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas celebrating the success of individuals promotes self-confidence, and whereas public recognition of students who achieve high academic standards encourages others to aim for greater academic success, and whereas 6 students in Lunenburg County were presented the Lieutenant Governor medals for demonstrating qualities of leadership and service within the school community while performing admirably in the classroom. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House congratulate Kathleen Conrad, Christopher Ritzy Conrad of Parkview Education Center, Stephanie Tidd and Nicholas Sanford of New Germany Rural High, and Adrian Snow and Chelsea Hillier of Bridgewater High School for their outstanding achievements during their grade 11 year. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the following adoption. Whereas the Duke of Edinburgh Award, also known as the Young Canadians Challenge, is a mark of excellence for Canadian students, and whereas the qualifications to achieve the Duke of Edinburgh Award are rigorous and challenging, and are designed to encourage young people to develop and maintain healthy, active lifestyles and get involved in their local communities. And whereas Dartmouth North residents Elizabeth Dubois and Andrea Richardson were recently awarded the Duke of Edinburgh Award, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate Elizabeth Dubois and Andrea Richardson as 2 Duke of Edinburgh Award recipients on this tremendous accomplishment. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on May 31st, 2006, Frank Woodworth was recognized by Canadian Blood Services for his over 75 donations of blood, and whereas Frank has organized 17 of the Berwick Lions Club's blood donor clinics over the past 30 years, and whereas the Berwick blood drives have collected 444 units of blood between April 2004 and March 2005, saving over 1,300 lives. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House congratulate Frank Woodworth for receiving this honor and recognize the contribution the Berwick Lions Club has made to others. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Nova Scotia sent a team to compete in the National Chess Championships for students held in Moncton, May the 22nd and 23rd, and whereas one of our team members, Adam Dorrance, won all 9 of his games to win the Canadian Grade 2 Championship, and whereas this is just the 2nd time a Nova Scotian has won a national title in this event, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House recognize and applaud the accomplishments of all our young chess team, and in particular the performance of our new Canadian Grade 2 champion, Adam Dorrance. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the work of veterans and Legion members of the Royal Canadian Legion, branch number 38, is honorable, and they are proud to work in Queens County. And whereas this dedicated group of veterans and members could no longer financially afford the upkeep of their former Legion Hall, and so committed to fundraising to support the construction of a new, smaller, and more manageable Legion Hall. And whereas on June 3rd, 2006, the veterans and members of branch number 38 officially opened the doors to their new Legion Hall with a dedication ceremony celebrated by Legion members and residents from across many communities. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly recognize and congratulate the remarkable veterans and members from the Royal Canadian Legion branch number 38 on the opening of their new Legion and offer them best wishes for many years of success. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Digby-Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in 1999, Constable John Kennedy of the RCMP in Stellarton began a program with the police and local communities to help children become comfortable with reading. And whereas Stopping Crime, One Book at a Time, is a successful program where officers act as a bridge between communities, various types of libraries such as public and school libraries, and even health clinics and women's shelters. And whereas Constable Nicholas Bernier of the Digby RCMP and Corporal Craig Smith are delivering a summer full of reading to the children of Bear River First Nations community, promoting this valuable program. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly recognize the extra work that Constable Bernier and Corporal Smith are providing to the children of Bear River and hope that others may follow their example. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll be requesting waiver of notice. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas between 1942 and 1948, 64,451 war brides and their children came to Canada, with almost all of them arriving at Pier 21 here in Halifax. And whereas this unprecedented influx of young women had a large influence on Canadian society, as descendants of war brides and their dashing Canadian husbands number in the tens of thousands. And whereas the Colchester Historical Society Museum is compiling binders of photos and stories collected from the war brides in the county, and until the end of the year, the exhibit entitled "They Followed Their Hearts" will be featured in the museum. Yes. In addition, the Truro Daily News has been running a weekly series profiling these amazing women. Therefore, be it resolved that this House join with 6 other Canadian provinces in marking 2006 as the Year of the War Bride, and commend the Colchester Historical Society Museum and the Truro Daily News for telling their important stories. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the 4 lawn bowling facilities in the Halifax-Dartmouth area include the Dartmouth, Bedford, St. Mary's and Wanderers clubs, and whereas the 2005 Provincial Men's Fours team includes 2 Dartmouthians, Alex Vance and Wally Boudreau, and whereas this team will be representing our province at the Canadian Lawn Bowls Championships starting August 14th in Regina, Saskatchewan. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia House of Assembly congratulate Alex Vance, John Whiteman, Graham Doyle, and Wally Boudreau for winning the 2005 Nova Scotia Men's Fours Lawn Bowls Championship and wish them well at the 2006 Canadian Championships. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas W.M. Ferris and Associates and J. Douglas Miller, Architects and Planners, have amalgamated to form Ferris Miller Group, Architects, Engineers and Planners, and whereas Wadia Ferris and J. Douglas Miller both bring many years of experience in development to the new organization, and whereas the Ferris Miller Group will bring together a professional team with innovative ideas and experience to serve the development community, therefore be it resolved that members of this House congratulate Wadia Ferris and J. Douglas Miller and wish them every success with the Ferris Miller Group. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas weather prediction is difficult and complicated matter taking years to study and perfect, whereas Wyerton Willie, an icon of weather prediction and a proven track record of 85% accuracy, died on Tuesday after a month-long illness due to infection. And whereas his fairly precise and accurate weather prediction made him a symbol for the town of Warrington, giving them worldwide recognition. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly thank Wyerton Willie for his years of service as we look upon a life once again tragically cut short. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth South Portland Valley on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I draw the House's attention to the West Gallery, where I want to introduce Renee Ross. Renee, if you'd stand. Renee is the coordinator of the Social Assistance Reform, Moving Forward, a Women-Positive Public Policy Agenda Initiative, and I ask you to join me in welcoming her to the Assembly.
The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the West Gallery, I'd like to introduce a few people, starting with John McPherson, formerly of Glace Bay and familiar to some of the members in this House and now of Eastern Passage. Ray Curran, who is always, the member from Glace Bay tells me he's always from Glace Bay. Ray Curran, formerly of Eastern Passage, now of Dartmouth, and my father, Eugene DeVoe, who used to be a councillor in Halifax County, worked with the Minister of Energy. I want to welcome them to the House.
Indeed, we welcome all our guests to the gallery today. Orders of the day. Oral questions put by members. Question period shall begin at 1:42 and end at 3:12. At 1:43 and end at 3:13. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Community Services. It has been demonstrated again and again in recent weeks that there is a deepening crisis in access to both inpatient mental health beds and supportive housing for mental health consumers in this province. People in mental health beds are discharged but can't leave because there's nowhere for them to go. Likewise, people in the community in desperate need of inpatient mental health beds can't get in because the beds are full. So my question to the Minister of Community Services is this: how much longer will her department freeze community beds and delay projects that would bring some relief to the system and to mental health consumers?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Leader of the Opposition for the opportunity to rise this afternoon and speak about an issue that certainly is a high priority to me and to the department. Mr. Speaker, there's no question that we deal every day with a series of complex cases around the province, and indeed many of these complex cases require a complex plan. I made known in the House last week that I had indicated to the department that I wanted immediate steps to be taken to ensure that a 5-bed facility would be ready. That's something tangible, Mr. Speaker, that we can move forward on, and I fully expect those details to be rolled out in the immediate days to come.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there are presently several proposals on the minister's desk to create badly needed new housing options for mental health consumers. One project on the South Shore has the donated land, some funding from donors, and the endorsement of advocates, businesses, and the community. The project would also provide a park space and river access for the public, something everyone can enjoy. And it provides high-quality, supportive housing for mental health consumers. So I want to ask the Minister of Community Services, when can this group expect some forward motion on this project?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And again, as we move forward with some of these homes and beds, Mr. Speaker, across the province, indeed, to serve all Nova Scotians, it would give me great pleasure to be able to move forward for something on the South Shore, Mr. Speaker, and I will certainly make the inquiries in the department to find out the specifics of that specific case and be pleased to get back to the Leader of the Opposition with the specifics on that one, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition, your final supplementary.
Well, that's great, and maybe while the minister is at it, she can deal with this one as well. The Canadian Mental Health Association is spearheading a proposal to build 25 to 30 units in Dartmouth, but they waited without word for months and are now concerned that they may be frozen out of running their own project if it goes forward. So these are just a couple of examples. So my question to the Minister of Community Services is, when will these projects start moving forward so that we can get discharged mental health patients out of hospitals and open up badly needed inpatient beds?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and again to the Leader of the Opposition, I thank him for the opportunity to speak on this very important issue. Certainly, as we move forward in the continuum of care committee that certainly my colleague in the Department of Health and I move forward on as we deal with some of these complex cases, Mr. Speaker, across the province. Indeed, we'll be considering all proposals that have been come forward, and certainly be pleased to get back to the Leader of the Opposition with specifics on that case as well in the days to come.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday we saw a small independent gas retailer refuse to adhere to the government's gas regulation system and raise the price higher than allowed. He knew he was breaking the law and could be fined, but simply could not survive under the system. When times are so desperate that Nova Scotians are willing to break the law, something is terribly wrong. There may soon be chaos in this province, much like in New Brunswick, with gas retailers refusing to obey laws, suppliers refusing to supply retailers, and gas stations closing down. The situation we are faced with is because of this government's plan and commitment to base public policy off of polls. Mr. Speaker, there's clearly no leadership in that. And my question is, Premier, you put this system in place because you thought it would curry favor in the public eye. The consumers are now saying that they don't want regulation. Retailers are now saying that they don't want it. My question is, what's left regarding regulation that you are clinging on to?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and through you to the Leader of the Liberal Party. Mr. Speaker, the reason and the rationale for moving forward with regulation was to ensure stability for Nova Scotians at the pumps. I believe that the majority of Nova Scotians wanted us to move forward with that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the gentleman in question, which the Leader has raised, has been already in contact. Contact has been made between the Department of Service Nova Scotia and that particular gentleman. There were issues that the independent gentleman was not aware of, and now he has been given that information.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier promised all Nova Scotians that this system would be the solution to our concerns. However, it's created a much greater problem to an already desperate situation. And as one retailer has stated, quote, "The province has betrayed us," end quote. Mr. Speaker, no matter what type of system is put in, gas regulation is simply not the answer for our province, and the Premier has the independent report that he commissioned that tells him exactly that. A few months ago, we had lower prices, retailers were not knowingly breaking laws, and we didn't have gas stations threatening to permanently close down. So my question to the Premier, it's now been 2 weeks, and already we are facing a desperate situation in our province. My question is, what is your plan now that you are forcing our rural retailers to break the laws or possibly have to close down their stations as a result of regulation?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, before moving forward with gas regulation, one of the key groups that we had discussions with, Mr. Speaker, was the Gas Retailers Association. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, there was a great deal of discussion on moving forward and gathering their input, Mr. Speaker. There are guaranteed margins put in place for the retailers. And Mr. Speaker, we will continue to move forward in working with them. And yes, there will be questions that come up from time to time, Mr. Speaker, and the government will work with them to ensure that their questions are answered and that we provide stability at the pumps for Nova Scotians.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians are seeing that the Premier's stability at the pumps means higher prices. We all await to see what Saturday's new price is going to bring, and more than likely even higher prices for Nova Scotians, while at the same time clearly not providing independent retailers with the margins that they were enjoying prior to gas regulation. The whole system of gas regulation in many areas of this province is now leaving independent retailers and the middle suppliers with an even smaller margin than what they were receiving before. The Minister knows that. It was in Canso. He knows it's taking place in Richmond County. How many other areas of the province? My question to the Premier, you knew gas regulation would not work based on that independent report. You're now seeing, having it put in place, that it's not working. How much longer is it going to take before your government admits that it made a mistake on gas regulation?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, when you take a look at the regulatory process, Mr. Speaker, there are guaranteed margins in place. There are transportation costs recognized in the new regulated system, Mr. Speaker. We as a government want to ensure stability at the pumps. There will be days where the price will be higher. There will be other days where it will be lower, Mr. Speaker, but there will be a smoothing effect, and that stability will be there for the people of our province at the pumps, and I think that is something that we can all agree on that the people deserve to have.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Premier. Nova Scotians continue to wait for access to the pain clinic at the QE2. Last year, the referral list contained 1,400 people, and one doctor at the clinic has referred to this as the forever list. This situation has not improved, Mr. Speaker, and patients are waiting as long as 5 years to get into the clinic. 5 years, often in excruciating pain. My question for the Premier is this: why has his government failed to take the necessary actions to address the pain clinic wait times here in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And indeed, the pain clinic is very important here in our province. And Mr. Speaker, indeed, I agree with the Leader of the Opposition. We have an issue and a challenge with wait times here in our province, as we do across the country. And we continue to work within the Department of Health, across the district health authorities, to ensure that we invest, and that's why we are investing in facilities, investing in equipment, investing in needed drugs and frontline healthcare workers, and we'll continue to do so. And Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Health has been doing so not only provincially, has been working on this issue of wait times nationally, and we'll continue to do so.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this government first invested money to study the pain clinic wait times in last year's budget. Now, Mr. Speaker, their plan is to form a committee to talk about the pain clinic. A committee will take far too long to address an issue that needs concrete action now, Mr. Speaker. We know we need more anesthesiologists, we need more resources, we need more staff at the clinic. There's a clinic in Cape Breton, and perhaps more satellite clinics will relieve the pressure at the QE2. So my question for the Premier is this: why not just talk to the frontline workers and ask what they need in order to address the long waits?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, through you to the Leader of the Opposition, in order to provide an appropriate update, I'll refer that to the Minister of Health.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and through you to the honourable member, that we know at this point that the pain management in this province has wait lists that are far too long. And that's why the committee was struck some time ago. It's being chaired by Mr. John Malcolm, who is providing utmost service to this province in all the things that he does. It includes physicians, people from the DHAs, allied health professionals, and of course DOH staff. And we have allocated in this budget, $700,000 to address the recommendations coming from that committee, which will bring up to the total of $1 million this year alone to address the issue of pain management in this province.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's been 6 years. 6 years. I would think that after 6 years, it's no secret that what this government wants to do is delay necessary resources that are needed. They delay spending that money. Whenever they want to do that, what they do is they issue a commission or they strike a committee. Well, Mr. Speaker, you only have to look at long-term care or mental health to know that that's what the government does. So I want to ask the Premier, it's not hard to figure out what is needed to reduce wait times. So why doesn't this government simply do it and bring long-awaited relief to Nova Scotians? And these are Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, who live every day in pain.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as the Minister has said, we're awaiting the appropriate recommendations from the committee, but recognizing that there has been an additional $700,000 put in the budget to deal with this issue. And I think that shows a commitment on behalf of the government, and it shows that the government really does want to deal with this issue.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Premier. Most Nova Scotia households are heated by fuel oil. The price of home heating fuel has increased by more than 120% in recent years. As a result, lower-income Nova Scotians spend an average of 14% of their income on energy. Provincial heating assistance, despite its flaws, has helped many people on fixed and low incomes deal with skyrocketing costs of heating their home. So my question for the Premier is this: will the Premier tell Nova Scotians why his government is cancelling its important low-income home heating relief?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And indeed, the government is providing HST relief, Mr. Speaker, to all Nova Scotians, regardless of the income, Mr. Speaker. And I'm sure we can take a look back at comments made by both the Leader of the Opposition and myself regarding this program. And perhaps, Mr. Speaker, we will do so. And I'll look back at both our comments in the last number of months.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition on your first supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Taking the HST off of home heating, an essential of life in our climate, is about tax fairness. Home heating assistance is required for thousands of Nova Scotians who live in energy poverty because they must spend so much of their income on heat and electricity. This is about helping people avoid such depths of poverty that they cannot afford to stay warm during the winter. So my question for the Premier is this: will the Premier state now how he is going to tackle the increase in poverty that will occur because he has cancelled the province's long-standing home heating assistance?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, as I said, Mr. Speaker, and I respect what the Leader of the Opposition is saying with regards to the Keep the Heat program. But, Mr. Speaker, we cannot be all things to all people in our province. There are only so many dollars to deal with. Now, the NDP may not realize that, Mr. Speaker, but the reality is here in our province that we are taking major steps by taking the provincial portion of the HST off on the home fuel, regardless of what that home fuel might be, Mr. Speaker. It's a significant step recognizing the challenges of all Nova Scotians, be it a senior or be it a family, Mr. Speaker, and the government will continue to do so.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier doesn't seem to realize that these are two separate issues. We're talking about low-income individuals who are living in poverty, who need the assistance of government. This government usually waits until the last minute to announce its low-income heating rebates, when many of those low-income individuals already face the choice between home heat and food. The Affordable Energy Coalition is urging a long-term provincial strategy to reduce and eliminate what they call energy poverty. I would ask the Premier this. Will the Premier say when his government is going to acknowledge that record high prices mean that home heating assistance will be required again this winter?
The Honourable, the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the government has recognized by providing the provincial portion of the HST. Annually, it will cost, I believe, $75 million, if I remember correctly. And, Mr. Speaker, that's a significant commitment on behalf of the province of Nova Scotia to the people of our province, and one that, Mr. Speaker, certainly in the last number of years, I've heard the opposition speak at length about this issue. We both agree on this issue, Mr. Speaker. In fact, I think they criticize very often the Keep the Heat program. Now, Mr. Speaker, we're hearing something totally different.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, a month ago, a panel of 5 economists commissioned by the Prime Minister made several recommendations with regard to equalization and the fiscal imbalance among provinces. Among the recommendations were proposals to cap the amount of money our province can receive under the offshore accord, and also a proposal that could potentially claw back significant amounts of offshore revenue received by our province. Although the proposal could see Nova Scotia gain extra revenue in the first year, there's a significant concern that amounts would be decreased in the years to come. My question, Mr. Speaker, for the Minister is, Minister, do you support the findings of the panel presented to the Prime Minister? It's not tough.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, to be very clear on this, the Government of Nova Scotia in no way would support anything that would in any way affect the offshore accord. And I'm very pleased to report to the House that I understand that Mr. Flaherty has made comments, that is the Federal Minister of Finance, has made quite clear comments that they're not looking backwards at any agreements, and so the offshore accord should remain unimpaired.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park, on your first supplementary.
That's okay, we trust him.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think what the Minister is saying is somewhat comforting, but of course time will tell as we go forward. My concern today, Mr. Speaker, is that we've been getting mixed signals from the government. In the budget speech, the Minister was clear and raised concerns about the offshore accord, equalization payments, and the fiscal imbalance issue. However, Ron Russell, who attended meetings during the election on behalf of the Premier, stated that both himself and Premier MacDonald initially welcomed the results of the panel's proposals. And at the same time, the Deputy of Intergovernmental Affairs stated that the province may not have done enough analysis to take a strong stance at that meeting. My question, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister is, given the mixed signals from government, can you tell us today what the official stance of government is on this issue of the proposals from the economists to the Prime Minister? Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, and to the Honourable Member, I believe that there may be some confusion around the fact that there have been 2 panel reports, in fact. There is the report to the Prime Minister that the Honourable Member alluded to, but then there was a report by the Council of the Federation as well on this subject, Mr. Speaker. And what I believe the former Deputy Premier, Mr. Russell, was referring to was the report to the Council of the Federation and not to the Prime Minister's, to the report to the Prime Minister. And Mr. Speaker, again, to make it perfectly clear, the Government of Nova Scotia in no way would support any change that would affect the offshore accord.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park, and your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's really important for the entire House to understand fully that this has enormous impacts to the province of Nova Scotia. Right. And I understand that the Minister would agree with that. I want to ask my final question to the Premier, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Premier, it was unfortunate that you were unable to attend the meeting in June with the Prime Minister, but another meeting is coming up at the end of July where equalization and the provincial fiscal imbalance will be at the forefront. My question to the Premier is, will you assure all Nova Scotians today that you will be attending that meeting and that you will advocate strongly that there be no cap on the equalization payments and that there will be full protection for our offshore accord?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the answer is absolutely yes.
The honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Energy. Following years of work by thousands of Nova Scotians and members of our caucus, the government has finally agreed to remove the HST from home heating sources: oil, electricity, propane, coal, firewood, or wood pellets. This HST relief will help many Nova Scotians with their heating costs, but the program put forward by this government does not start until January the 1st, 2007, halfway through this coming heating season, and certainly after the Christmas lighting season. And as we've heard just now from the Leader of the Opposition, this government has cancelled low-income heating assistance programs. So my question, Mr. Speaker, through to the Minister, why does this government refuse to offer heating assistance from the start of the heating season when it is really needed?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the government is very aware of the difficulties that people experience through the winter months with heating. This government has put a plan in place. This government has put a solid plan in place, and one that the government is going to stand by. Also, Mr. Speaker, it's not only just about the rebate of the HST on the rebate of both fuel and energy costs in the home, but also it's an efficient use of energy, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Pictou West on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, consumers are not the only ones who face a challenge dealing with this government's choosing of an arbitrary date to start the HST relief. I've been talking to retailers who say they'll be hurt by this as well. One building supply dealer tells me he'll be stuck with a stockpile of wood pellets, and an oil wholesaler also indicates that this date will cause problems for him. After all, who wants to buy their cords of wood or use their extra bit of oil if it's cheaper after January the 1st? So, Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the Minister again, when will he get in sync with the seasons and start this HST relief at the beginning of the heating season?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Mr. Speaker, I say to the member across the floor, all new plans take certain timing, and we have to make sure that these plans are solid. This plan that has been delivered by this province is solid, Mr. Speaker, and we put this forth so that people, all Nova Scotians, can benefit, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Pictou West on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the government was finally starting to head in the right direction on this issue, and then when they admitted that heating is an essential and it ought not to be taxed, that's great. But yet they persist in taxing nearly for half the coming heating season. So my final question to the Minister, how can you justify continuing to take in millions of tax revenue from something you've admitted should not be taxed in the first place?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to share some numbers with the honourable member across the floor. This government has a $70 million program in place, Mr. Speaker. $70 million. $70 million, Mr. Speaker. I could stand here all day and say the amount of $70 million. This government is aware of the cost of energy to low-income families. And once again, all Nova Scotians will benefit, Mr. Speaker, from this program. Also, Mr. Speaker, there's $10 million put in a program called Smart Energy Choices. Mr. Speaker, $10 million in which people can benefit from. Also, Mr. Speaker, while the provincial government is awaiting the federal decision on Intercan, it's making forward steps to put programs in place, Mr. Speaker, to help people properly insulate and bring their house up to a place where they can afford their energy costs, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister in charge of the Public Service Commission. Mr. Speaker, female Crown attorneys in this province are being treated unfairly by this government, and they have been for a number of years, Mr. Speaker. Female Crown attorneys who choose to take maternity leave, Mr. Speaker, lose up to 1 year benefit with regard to pay scale and seniority. And I would argue that this is very discriminatory against these female Crown attorneys, Mr. Speaker. They do a very important service for Nova Scotians. So my question to the Minister is, why is his government continuing to discriminate against female Crown attorneys?
The Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and Mr. Speaker, through you to the member opposite. As the member knows, the Crown attorneys negotiate their own agreement with the province of Nova Scotia, and the Crown attorneys will address that issue in discussions, I'm sure, in the future.
The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage on your first supplementary.
I don't think the minister understands. This should not be a matter for negotiation. This should be a minimum standard that every woman who works in the civil service has a right to ensure that when they go on maternity leave, they do not have to be penalized for that. Mr. Speaker, this would only take a simple policy change within the Public Service Commission to ensure that every female civil servant had this same benefit. So my question to the minister is simple. When is his government going to change this policy, direct the Public Service Commission to do the right thing, and stop discriminating against female Crown attorneys?
The Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and through you to the member opposite. Obviously, the member opposite would know it's not an issue of straight seniority. It's of significant years of service, the way that the Crown attorneys count their time. The issue here certainly is one that the Public Service Commission is prepared and is exploring with the Crown attorneys. Since the agreement expired this April, those discussions will occur in the future this summer. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My last question is for the Minister of Justice. He's the minister in charge of the Public Prosecution Service. He's the minister in charge of the Human Rights Code, and he's the minister who's supposed to be upholding the Charter of Rights in this province, Mr. Speaker. So my question to the Minister of Justice is simple. When is he going to enforce the Human Rights Code on his own government and ensure that this government stops discriminating against female Crown attorneys?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member opposite for bringing a very important issue before this House. I've had the opportunity, as you know, to work with a lot of these Crown prosecutors, and I appreciate what the members bringing before the House, and I will make a commitment to this House that through my department I'll bring this issue forward and study it and place it under review immediately.
The honourable member for Kings West.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Human Resources. Both last week and again yesterday, I posed a question to the Minister in Human Resources, and I must say, Mr. Speaker, the Minister left me with far more questions than answers. As everyone is aware, Mr. Speaker, this government recently chose to appoint a political friend to a well-paid, important position that is yet to be created in this province. According to the business plan for the Public Service Commission, and I will table the executive summary, the Minister is responsible for high-quality human resource principles and practices. My question to the Minister, do you believe that appointing an individual to a position that did not even go through a competition process is an example of a high-quality human resource management principle?
The Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as the honourable member knows, part of this government's initiative with the Department of Energy is a program, Conserve Nova Scotia, which is extremely important for fuel efficiency, protection of the environment, and dealing with issues because of the high cost of fuel and because of our concern as a government over the state of our environment and being able to preserve it. Using the services of an existing individual to ensure that it's set up properly, then management is a practical and right thing to do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Kings West on your first supplementary.
Well, we didn't get too far there. Last week, the minister indicated that Heather Foley-Melvin possesses key skills to perform the job, namely understanding and learning. Mr. Speaker, it sounds like these key skills are more or less found about 99% working-age individuals in Nova Scotia. The minister's business plan also states that the minister is responsible for providing consistent application of human resource practices across the public service. Given that the minister is responsible for consistent application of human resources practices, would the minister please indicate whether appointing political friends without going through an open and transparent competition is a practice that is carried out by this government throughout all departments, or was this a special case?
The Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I certainly would agree with the member opposite on one point, that Nova Scotians as a skilled workforce are some of the best in the country. Learning and understanding is part of the culture of education and employment in this province, and I'm pleased to see the member opponents acknowledge that particular fact. But Mr. Speaker, I think it's important that people with experience who have been involved in government are there to help set up important institutions that will be a benefit to all Nova Scotians. Thank you.
The honourable member for Kings West on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it would appear that this government stands by its word when they state that Heather Foley Melvin is qualified, the best qualified perhaps in Nova Scotia, to become CEO of Conserve Nova Scotia. And given that they are so certain that this is the case, will the Minister of Energy, before the end of business today, table a copy of the job description for the CEO of Conserve Nova Scotia, including the qualifications required for the position?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, earlier on this morning I had an opportunity to meet with Heather Foley Melvin. At that particular time we discussed some operations within the department. Mr. Speaker, she's going to work with the Department of Energy, and I feel confident, Mr. Speaker, that this lady has a background in marketing and promotion and advertisement. And Mr. Speaker, this is what we need to forge ahead with the Department of Energy's plan, and we're glad to have her aboard. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Environment and Labour. As we're well aware in this House, Mr. Speaker, in October of 2003, a decision came down from the Federal Court of Canada regarding chronic pain and stripped away many of the positions in the Act, the Workers' Compensation Act, as related to chronic pain. Now, Mr. Speaker, chronic pain sufferers in Nova Scotia should have been celebrating that case, and for a short time they were. But now, due to the punitive actions of the WCB, many are back suffering even more, Mr. Speaker. In my constituency alone, Mr. Speaker, I have an injured worker who's over 80 years old and has been in the system for over 60 years. And his case will not be decided on because he was a pre-charter injury. So I want to ask the minister responsible for WCB is why is he being so callous and allowing this to go on at workmen's compensation?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's the intention of the provincial government, as has been stated before, to compensate those whose chronic pains developed chronic pains on or after April 17, 1985, in light of the Supreme Court decision, and we are doing that, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre, on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So what he's telling the House today, that's been decided on, that WCB has decided that it will not pay pre-charter injuries. Can the minister tell me in this House today, when was that decided on, and why weren't these workers told?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the member raises a very important issue in terms of chronic pain, and the Workmen's Compensation Board are looking at this issue, and they're working very hard at it. We've hired 70 extra staff people to help deal with it. As you know, Mr. Speaker, 6,000 individual cases have made application. All of them need to be individually appealed, and we're working hard at it, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, either that minister doesn't know his department very well, or he's not being very forthcoming with this House. He made one statement which was erroneous, or he should have answered the other question and tell us when those poor injured workers, like Mr. Poirier in Dominion, will know. Minister, you're abdicating your responsibility. Absolutely. This is shameful. When will these workers know, since you have told this House that decision is made, when will these pre-charter injury people know that they've been excluded? When, Minister?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. And the member obviously has constituents concerned about an issue. I will check into this and get back to the member.
The Honourable Member for Hants East.
That's what you get with an 18-member cabinet. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question, Mr. Speaker. My question, Mr. Speaker, will be for the Minister of Agriculture. In April 2000, the Conservative government cut nearly 100 experienced marketing, crop, and livestock experts, technicians, and support staff from that minister's department, some of them with 31 years' experience, Mr. Speaker. During the recent election, this government said it would hire 10 support staff, and I assume that means they would be employed within the Department of Agriculture. So, Mr. Speaker, AgriPoint was created and is funded to the tune of $2.2 million a year to provide these support services to Nova Scotia's agricultural community. So I'd like to ask the minister, who, by the way, Mr. Speaker, is the AgriPoint's sole shareholder, if hiring department support staff is at a mission of AgriPoint's failure.
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And first of all, I want to say how proud I am of the record of this government on this side of the House. And in fact, we have committed to the farming community through our political platform, yes, to hire 10 additional support workers to help the farming community. Mr. Speaker, I further would say that we were extremely pleased when we were the first province off the mark to establish a task force in this province to deal with the mad cow disease. And that caucus, the NDP caucus, even though they were requested, did not send a member to support the mad cow task force. And on the other hand, the Liberal caucus did send their agriculture critic.
The Honourable Member for Hants East on your first supplementary.
Thank you. Thank you.
Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable Member for Hants East has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Fortunately, the NDP learned early on how useless Conservative task force are.
Here. The Red Tape Commission.
Mr. Speaker, looking at the AgriPoint website, I discovered that Nova Scotia is not mentioned in their mission statement, nor is the word Nova Scotia mentioned once in their About Us page. AgriPoint has an office in Kentville and one in Truro, but has no one serving Cape Breton. But Mr. Speaker, AgriPoint has an employee working on Prince Edward Island in the Surrey area.
Come visit my island.
So my question for the minister is how does an AgriPoint employee on Prince Edward Island help Nova Scotia farmers, especially in light of the fact that farmers on our own island of Cape Breton don't have an AgriPoint staffer posted there?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to tell the honourable member that this government and this minister is looking at the situation in Cape Breton, and we expect in the coming future to have an announcement about the AgriPoint and in fact the coverage in Cape Breton. We're working hard with the farming community because after all, farmers feed us all.
The Honourable Member. The Honourable Member for Hants East on your final supplementary.
Surrey now, John?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a good thing that farmers feed us all because they're finding it hard to swallow what this government has been feeding them. Mr. Speaker, you'd have thought that a government that cut agricultural services here wouldn't be using taxpayers' dollars to supply services in PEI. So I want to ask the minister, will the minister stand in this House today and admit that using Nova Scotia taxpayers' dollars to fund services in other provinces when our industry is underserviced clearly indicates the failure of his department to recognize the needs of the agricultural industry in our own province?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's important that the honourable member recognize that the board of directors at AgriPoint is run essentially by industry. The very people that he is criticizing are running AgriPoint, and this government has, and the Department of Agriculture has a memorandum of understanding that is supported by industry, and the professional that is providing the services from Prince Edward Island is doing so out own home at no cost to the Nova Scotia taxpayers, but yet the money is coming back to the province of Nova Scotia. We're being extremely well served by the professional help that we're getting from Prince Edward Island.
The honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the minister responsible for the Emergencies Management Office. Yesterday, forecasters expressed concern that waters off the coast of Nova Scotia are now measuring 2 to 5 degrees warmer than usual. All of this points to what could be an active hurricane season. I'm sure that we can all recall the prolonged power outages of both Hurricane Juan and White Juan. Last October, representatives of EMO, during a committee meeting, mentioned a program to help municipal units purchase generators for comfort centers. And as I understand it, the second and final phase of this program was announced in November. My question to the minister: was there 100% take-up on this program, and do all the municipal units who made a request to this program have access to generators in case of any future emergencies?
The honourable minister responsible for the Emergency Measures Organization.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and the member opposite asked a very good question. Monies were made available in the last year to municipalities to cover the partial cost of generators that would be used in designated emergency or comfort centers throughout the province, so that food and heat, if needed, could be supplied in the case of a natural disaster or any other type of occurrence. Those monies were fully utilized at approved comfort centers. Last year, we continue to monitor what the demand is for future need of generators for those comfort stations, and when the need is there, we will be taking the appropriate actions to support them again.
The honourable member for Digby Annapolis on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, last year during committee, concerns were expressed about the most vulnerable citizens, our seniors, who reside in nursing homes and facilities and who would require immediate attention and care in times of emergencies. At that time, we expressed concerns that the Auditor General stated over 2 years ago that emergency planning for homes for special care needed to be reviewed. The response from EMO was that the Department of Health failed to provide a list of facilities to be assessed to ensuring that nursing homes are ready for an emergency. My question to the minister is, has this list now been provided to EMO from the Department of Health, and have the assessments and emergency exercises been done on these facilities?
The honourable minister responsible for the Emergency Measures Organization.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and again to the member, honourable member opposite, that assessment and work with the Department of Health is ongoing to ensure that those people in vulnerable situations through those homes can receive the greatest degree of protection during a natural disaster as possible. We will continue this year working with the Department of Health and other departments across government to ensure that we are in a position to provide the protection that is required and is possible under those conditions of a disaster. Thank you.
The honourable member for Digby Annapolis on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, my final question is to the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, I can't think of any segment of our population that deserves to be reassured that their homes they reside in are ready and prepared for an emergency than our seniors. My final question for the Minister is, Minister of Health, given that it's been 2 years since the Auditor General issued a warning, are you 100% confident that emergency plans for all homes for special care under your control are up to date and emergency exercises are routinely conducted?
Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I thank the member opposite for highlighting this very important issue. And I can assure all members of this House that the preparedness plans have been done, and the Continuing Care Branch has identified all the needs and requirements of our seniors in the province that reside in our facilities, and that has been shared with the Department of EMO.
The honourable member for Halifax-Shabukto.
This will be to the Minister for Economic Development. Mr. Speaker, this government has tried to claim credit for extensive job creation in recent years. It was one of their main claims during the recent election. The government tries to portray itself as a good manager of the economy, but between the election in 2003 and now, the total number of employed persons in Nova Scotia increased by only 11,000. Not the 40,000 the government often mentions, and of those 11,000, some 10,000 have had to come through government subsidies of $24,000 per job. Will the minister admit that his government has been claiming credit for way too many new jobs in Nova Scotia and that real job growth has been minimal?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and through you to the honourable member. I thank the member for recognizing the track record of this government since 1999. The job creation in this province is on record. We broke all records since 1999, since this party formed government in this province, and we stand very proud of that record, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax-Shabukto on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Even if 1999 is taken at the base, it's still not 40,000. And there is more bad news. The Nova Scotia labour force has declined substantially just in this last year. Between February 2005 and May 2006, over 7,600 people have left the Nova Scotia workforce. That's 1.5% drop in just 13 months. All the talk we hear about Nova Scotians moving to Alberta is real, and it's showing up now in the official statistics. One of the anomalies associated with this is that when our young people leave the province, it makes our unemployment figures go down. Mr. Speaker, will the minister confirm that out-migration is the real reason why our unemployment rate is dropping?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What I will deal with is unemployment is down, employment is up in this province, Mr. Speaker. And I can assure that member and all members of this House that this minister and my department and this government will be reaching out in every community in this province looking for opportunities for economic growth in this province, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax-Shabukto on your final supplementary.
Speaker, it's the labour market in rural Nova Scotia that is especially disturbing. Primary industry, manufacturing, food production, and tourism, employment is in decline in all of them. Think Stora, think Shaw Wood, think Lightbridge, think Highland Fisheries. Will the minister explain to rural Nova Scotians why they have been abandoned by his government?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and through you to the member opposite and all members in this House, that this government knows that there's a rural base into this province, and we are dealing with every rural area into the province of Nova Scotia. We have a great tool at our disposal, Mr. Speaker, and that's called the RDAs in our province. And we are working with the RDAs, and those RDAs are made up by local governments and local communities, Mr. Speaker. And I can assure the member opposite that we have the Office of Economic Development and we have Nova Scotia Business Inc., and they are doing their due diligence and they are finding and attracting new companies to come to our province, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Transportation and Public Works. Since their creation, accessible parking spots have been the subject of abuse by unauthorized users. People with no permit, with an expired permit, sometimes even permits not belonging to them, are parked in the allocated spots. Mr. Speaker, holders of these permits do not get them for convenience. They obtain them out of need. A person in a wheelchair requires these wider spaces to maneuver out of their vehicles. My question to the minister is, what is your government doing to curb the abuse of accessible parking spaces?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and the honourable member indeed.
brings forward a question which is very worthy of the consideration of the House and of the municipalities in this province which are responsible for the enforcement of parking regulations. And Mr. Speaker, I can assure the honourable member that this is something that the abuse of this is something that we're not at all pleased with, and we will certainly work with the municipalities to lessen that abuse to the greatest extent possible, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South Portland Valley on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Currently, someone found illegally in one of these spaces would receive a fine in Nova Scotia of $75. In Ontario, the fine ranges between $300 and $5,000 for the same infraction. For the benefit of persons with disabilities who need these parking spaces, something more needs to be done to deter those who would abuse them. Mr. Speaker, this government has increased fines for other vehicle infractions, and a change is needed in this case. My question for the minister is, when will he increase these fines to make them an actual deterrent to such abuse?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And one of the concerns that we must take into account when considering fines is the you get so upset with the kind of abuse you see that you'd really like to shove it to them in terms of the amount of the fine. However, if the fine is too high, Mr. Speaker, if you need me to change my language, I'll try. But I just share the honourable member's frustration with people who abuse the parking spots. If the fine is too high, then the courts tend not to find people guilty in those circumstances. But certainly, Mr. Speaker, I take the honourable member's suggestion, and we will have a look at current fines and what the practices are in other jurisdictions.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South Portland Valley on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly a significant increase in fines would deter the abuse of these parking spaces, but there are other transportation needs of the disabled community that must be addressed as well. Nova Scotia needs more accessible transportation. So I ask the minister, how will this minister work with representatives of the disabled community to develop better accessible transportation options?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I know from a previous portfolio that accessible transportation is an issue for Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations, and I would ask that minister to respond.
The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and that is a very good question from the honourable member. This caucus has met with representatives of the disabled group, as I assume that the other caucuses have, annually to address the case of more accessible transportation. There are programs in the Department of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Department of Health, Department of Education, Department of Justice.
Excuse me, in my department, Mr. Speaker, where there are monies available to organizations to improve accessible transportation.
The Honourable Member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Environment and Labour. 1 week ago today, I posed a question to the Minister of Environment and Labour with respect to initiatives his department plans to take with respect to changing public attitudes about climate change. After making light of the situation, the Minister responded he would talk to the federal government. With all due respect, Mr. Speaker, the Conservative federal government has already shown how much priority they place on the environment by cancelling programs. So quite frankly, this minister's response is not good enough. My question to the minister is, when will he, as minister, be announcing a replacement program that will encourage Nova Scotians in the impacts and actions they need to take in order to lessen the impact of global warming on Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as I responded before, and I certainly didn't mean to make light of the member's comments because it's a very important issue for Nova Scotians, for Canadians, indeed for all citizens in this globe of ours, that I had already touched base with the Federal Minister of the Environment, that I was looking forward to meeting with her and talking about this and other environmental issues. And I intend to keep that promise that I made to the honourable member last time.
The honourable member for Preston on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, 2 years ago, New Brunswick partnered with the Federal Environment Department to study the impacts of sea level rise and climate change. Through the results of this study, New Brunswick has identified future rates of erosion as a result of sea level rise so that vulnerable areas can be identified and appropriate measures are implemented to protect these areas. Research yielded 3D maps that can be used in computer simulation to see which areas would be flooded when sea levels rise to various heights. These results would be useful when it comes to evaluating coastal communities in times of sea surge. My question to the Minister is, do we have similar information here in Nova Scotia so that we can know exactly which of our coastal communities are vulnerable and need to be protected when increased sea levels are accelerated as a result of climate change?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I personally, as MLA, have access to information that was published out of Acadia University that shows the change to Nova Scotia in regard to rising sea levels. However, the information that the scientist gave me from Acadia, he told me was provisional, and so I will endeavour for the honourable member to see if we have more accurate data that I can provide for him.
The honourable member for Preston on your final supplementary.
Thank you very much. One of the partners in the New Brunswick study was the actual team from Nova Scotia Centre for Geographic Studies, who used light detection and ranging technology with digital evaluation modeling to identify vulnerable areas. This begs the question as to why we here in Nova Scotia have not engaged in a similar provincially funded project. When will the Minister follow New Brunswick's lead and implement a similar project in all coastal areas of Nova Scotia for the safety of all Nova Scotians?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as I've told the House on several occasions before, one of the very first things I did was meet with the head of Conserve Nova Scotia. We had a good discussion about these issues. We will continue to have those talks. I know that although there'll be a narrow focus to that agency, that there is the wider focus on air quality, and I intend to follow through on those talks and on my promises I've made to the House.
The Honourable Member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Health Promotion and Protection. The news that fewer teenagers are smoking in Nova Scotia is welcome. However, this government still has done nothing to address the blatant advertising by tobacco companies to our children and youth. Tobacco power walls are displays of products and advertising behind counters, often located near products children are attracted to, like candy and videos. I ask the Minister, when will this province ban tobacco power walls and force retailers to put these products out of sight where they belong?
The Honourable Minister of Health Promotion and Protection.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member raises a very important issue. We're very proud of our track record here in Nova Scotia in the ability to reduce the prevalence of smoking, particularly in our young people. We've worked very hard with that, Mr. Speaker, and the tools and the measures that we put in place have shown results, and we'll continue to work towards further results, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Queens on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, everything from poster height to the colorful packaging is designed to catch the eye and market these deadly products to the next generations. Tobacco companies invest a lot of money on researching how to hook children and youth on smoking, and it's up to this government to make it harder for them to succeed. Other provinces, most recently Prince Edward Island, have banned point-of-sale marketing and displays of tobacco products. I ask the Minister, why is this government dragging its feet in doing the same thing?
The Honourable Minister of Health Promotion and Protection.
Mr. Speaker, as I said in my first answer, we're very proud of the work that we've done and the results that work has shown here in Nova Scotia. We will continue to work to find ways to reduce the rate of smoking in Nova Scotia. We know that smoking-related illnesses kill nearly 1,600 people every year here in Nova Scotia, and that's why we've dedicated so much time and so much effort and so much energy into reducing that rate of smoking prevalence.
The honourable member for Queens on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I am referring to the power walls of advertisement that tobacco companies use. And for every teenager this province convinces to quit smoking or not to start at all, the tobacco companies are coming up with countermeasures to ensure that they have a new generation of consumers. We must do everything we can to protect these young people from exposure to tobacco use. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask the Minister, why won't he commit to bringing forward legislation banning point-of-sale displays this fall?
The Honourable Minister of Health Promotion and Protection.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in fact, we already have committed to do that this fall. In fact, it appears in our platform that we presented to Nova Scotians, building for families, building for futures. The platform's commitment is clear. A ban on aggressive point-of-sale advertising is one of the commitments that we made to Nova Scotians, and we are doing it this fall, Mr. Speaker.
The member's been asked to table that document that he's referred. The member will table a copy of what he read from. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Economic Development. Since April 2003, Communications Nova Scotia's advertising budget has increased by nearly 90%. Last year alone, it increased by almost $600,000. By March 2006, Communications Nova Scotia spent almost $4.8 million of taxpayers' dollars on advertising. Nearly all of this money was spent on the provincial Come to Life campaign. Whoa. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister of Economic Development is, will this minister explain why Communications Nova Scotia spent $4.7 million advertising Nova Scotia to its own citizens?
There you go. Come to life. Here, please. The question being asked specifically refers to matters that would come before estimates before the House. I would ask the member to rephrase her question. Get up and see what you do. Go do. I didn't know. Question two. It's all timing about an election, I think, Joan.
Well,
let's just don't give him the preamble. Give him the question.
why then, Mr. Speaker, why is the Department of Economic Development advertising to Nova Scotians with our own taxpayer dollars? Why are they advertising information that we already know at the, to the tune of a lot of money?
Fair question for the Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I'd love to respond to the question the honourable member posed to me, but I refer that to the minister responsible, the Minister of Health Promotions.
The Honourable Minister responsible for Health Promotion and Protection and Communication, Nova Scotia.
There we go.
Nova Scotia.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to answer the honourable member's question. The fact is that not all Nova Scotians are aware of the information that we provide through our campaign through Brand Nova Scotia, and I believe it's important that Nova Scotians fully understand through the Brand Nova Scotia initiative the impacts. But in addition to that, Mr. Speaker, the more important part is the fact that the Brand Nova Scotia initiative reaches out well beyond Nova Scotia borders to all Canadians and to all those who need to know about Nova Scotia.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on your first supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Communications Nova Scotia business plan for 2006 and 7 states the agency's role includes managing and delivering Nova Scotia's brand initiative. As the business plan states, now that we've got our mitts on it, Brand is plunging forward with the brassy vigor of a marching band.
Whoa, nice quote.
So, Mr. Speaker, although I cannot ask a direct question involving money, does the Minister of Economic Development think that he will continue marching along in the same... Health Promotion think that he will march? Mr. Speaker, whoever wants to ask the question, go for it, okay?
Has the minister heard the question? The honourable minister responsible for Communications Nova Scotia.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we intend to continue marching along.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on your final supplementary.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, the Communications Nova Scotia business plan also states, the environment in which we work values, in fact, demands accountability and demonstrable bang for buck. So does the Minister of Economic Development think that Communications Nova Scotia currently does represent accountable or demonstrable bang for buck? Fair.
No. The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could I have the question reposed to me, please?
About that outbreak protection, would the Honourable Member for Dartmouth East repeat the question for the Honourable Minister of Economic Development?
Not a problem. Not a problem. Hope he's got his earplug in. Mr. Speaker, the Communications Nova Scotia business plan states, the environment in which we work values, in fact, demands accountability and demonstrable bang for buck. So, to the Minister of Economic Development, does the Minister think that indeed Communications Nova Scotia currently represents a demonstrable bang for buck?
Wake up.
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Yes, absolutely.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, through you, my question is for the Minister of Energy. You know, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia has no policy for wind installation and taxes them like any other business. The assessment regime results in the highest taxes on wind farms in Canada. An 2005 report from the Canadian Wind Energy Association states the tax assessment for a 20 megawatt wind installation in this province would be almost $500,000 per annum. In comparison, Nova Scotia Power pays a grant in lieu of property taxes. This means wind projects in Nova Scotia pay over 7 times as much as NSPEI. So through you, Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the Minister, why is he rewarding large polluters like NSPEI and punishing wind producers?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and through you to the member. In a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, the Department of Energy, Service Nova Scotia, is working with industry as we speak.
Member for Cape Breton Centre on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if they're working with it, I'd like to ask this next question for sure then, that the federal wind production incentive is running out. It is only available for wind farms commissioned before March 1, 07. Nova Scotia has currently 1 wind farm located in Pubnico Point. In addition, other turbine operators in the province, and there are many other installations planned across this province, Mr. Speaker. However, many of these proposed investments are running out of time. So I want to ask this minister, what is he doing with his federal cousins to move WIPI forward?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the member, as I said earlier, the Department of Energy, Service Nova Scotia, is working with the municipalities and also industry to put a plan in place that we all are winners, that we all enjoy the benefit of wind energy in Nova Scotia. The department is focused on moving forward in this avenue, and Mr. Speaker, we will do that. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, if they're working arm in arm here, Mr. Speaker, they sure have a certain line of tough love. The owners of that wind farm in Pubnico appealed the assessment, were successful at the regional assessment appeals, and paid the sum the regional appeals court recommended. Sounds fair to me. Not to this government, though. This government appealed the decision to UAB. Then they didn't stop there. They then appealed it to the Supreme Court of Nova Scotia, claiming their own regional appeals court had no jurisdiction. So I want to ask this minister again, whose side is he on?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Easiest question to answer, Mr. Speaker. This minister in the department is on the side of Nova Scotians. Thank you.
The honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture. Ground fish processing plants are closing all over the province, and we have yet to see little or no action from this government. The situation we have in places like Glace Bay, Shetty Camp, and Lewisburg are just more casualties of our declining fishing industry in Nova Scotia. At one time, there were 20 processing plants in the Digby area alone. Now we're down to just 2, and they're on the verge of closing. My question to the minister is, has the government made any plans for the remaining fish plant workers in Nova Scotia, or are more people going to have to leave this province in search of employment?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and through you to the member opposite. This government does have a considerable amount of concern for the fish plant workers that we have in the province of Nova Scotia and the situation that we see ourselves in with the fish processing sector. There's a lot of different things that contribute to the problems that we're having in the sector right now with the price of labor in China, getting raw resource to produce. A whole host of things. The Canadian dollar and the American dollar is a problem. So yes, Mr. Speaker, we do have concerns. We do have some things that we want to discuss with as soon as possible with the federal government, the federal DFO minister. So when I get an opportunity to do that, those issues will be brought forward and we will work on them. Thank you.
The honourable member for Digby Annapolis on your first supplementary.
The ground fishing industry was one of the cornerstones of Nova Scotia. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, the industry is quickly going the way of the dinosaur in this province. Communities are dying, people are suffering because of these closures. Henbeck Sea Products has less than a week to save this season's production. But what about the next year and the year after that? And the escalated situation at Highland Fisheries is providing to us that workers are becoming desperate to keep themselves financially stable. My question to the minister is, will your government commit to creating sustainable programs and help keep the people who are working these plants here so no more are forced to leave this province?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and through you to the member opposite. Just this morning, my colleagues from Cape Breton North, my colleague from Cape Breton West, and Cape Breton the Lakes had a meeting regarding such issues as the Cape Breton processing facilities that we have, as well as I have one of my own riding in Canso. And yes, Mr. Speaker, we will work with the federal government, we will work with the municipalities, we will work with the members of the opposition to see that we get positive results for fish plant workers in the province of Nova Scotia.
The honourable member for Digby Annapolis on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, my final question is for the Premier. As I stated earlier, thousands of people are leaving Nova Scotia in search of employment in other provinces and even other countries. Our population is aging and declining at the same time, Mr. Speaker. Rural communities are the heart of Nova Scotia, and they're going to be extinct if something isn't done. Other countries have worked and found solutions for their coastal communities, and they are alive and growing. My final question for the Premier is, will this government make a commitment to look at other industrial fishing countries and see how they save their coastal communities from extinction?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the member brings up a very good point, Mr. Speaker, and I can assure that member and all members that the Department of Fisheries, Mr. Speaker, will continue its work to ensure that we take a look at what is happening in other parts of the country and other parts of the globe, Mr. Speaker. We want to make sure that our small communities out in rural Nova Scotia, I represent many of those communities myself, have every opportunity for survival. It is because of the work that was done through fisheries and economic development, as an example, that we're seeing the Shetty Camp fish plant reopen this very month.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the minister responsible for the Public Service Commission. All members of this House are familiar with stories of young people from our communities going down the road to find work. While this situation has been mostly present in the trades and manufacturing, the aging of baby boomers is adding a new dynamic to the situation. More and more of our young people are leaving the province to take positions in the public sector, whether it's teaching, healthcare, or civil service in other provinces. So my question through you, Mr. Speaker, is to the Minister. What steps is his government taking to retain our young people in this province for careers in the public sector?
The Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and through you to the member opposite. Certainly, the Public Service Commission and Human Resources is very concerned as we see the workforce here in the province, the public service, many of them approaching retirement age. There are a great many opportunities for young Nova Scotians. That's why we do have a HR corporate strategy for that turnover. It's why we have programs that mentor and bring young university graduates into public service for work training and work periods. And it's also why this government, through many of the departments represented by my colleagues here, employ young Nova Scotians for summer terms so they can experience what it's like to work for the province of Nova Scotia and work for the citizens of Nova Scotia as well, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Nova on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.